Hey guys, it's Alan. I just wanted to come in here real quick at the beginning of the episode and say that we had some weird Skype issues after the first episode discussion, and so we had to end the call and bring it back. It should sound seamless to you guys. It was about a minute of waiting for us. Don't worry about it. Everything's cool. Shouldn't happen again. And enjoy the episode. Hey everybody, we are here for episode 2 of ScapeChatz, where I, Alan, and my partner in crime, Magellan, discuss the classic sci-fi television series Farscape.
Yeah.
John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I just woke up not 20 minutes ago. Well, that's not true. So I woke up this morning at 9 a.m. and I was chipper and awake and the sun was out. And I was like, what is going on? What has happened? This is not how I want to live my life. I don't want to be awake at 9. And then an hour later I was very tired and I said, oh, okay, this is better. And I fell asleep for 3 hours and now here I am.
It's the life of an adult here, is what this is.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
But you're in control of your life, just like the characters on the Moy. Segways, everyone, segways. We watched 2 episodes this week, Magellan.
We did.
And we are still following the Netflix episode order. So
Right.
the first episode we watched is called Back and Back and Back to the Future, which is a fantastic name. Magellan, what did you think of Back and Back and Back to the Future?
I thought it was bold to do such a complex episode so soon, I guess. Because time travel is always going to get sticky, no matter how well you do it. And to do it, for us, this is the third episode we've seen. For them, I think it was still only like, I can look it up, but I think it was only like the 5th episode or something.
Yes, it was in fact the first episode.
Yeah, so very bold to do something so complex, and I thought they pulled it off. Pulled off a pretty confusing episode at first fairly well without losing my interest.
I agree. I think it was like you said, very bold episode, very interesting episode. I don't know. I felt like it dragged a little bit in the middle, just because it starts off very strong with everything involving Dargo, and then it just kind of happened. Things just happen for a while,
Yeah,
and then there's only reveals towards the end.
yeah, that's true. I think part of the reason that it dragged is you start to lose sight of what is consequential and what isn't, which is the one danger of this premise, is you never know which flashes are going to stick and which ones aren't. And it's totally arbitrary to the point that I don't even know why at the end it stabilized. Did they ever explain that?
I don't think so. I think what this episode, the moment where it found its legs was when it started doing the Groundhog Day thing, where it goes forward a little bit, mess something up, start over again, go forward further, start again, until he goes through the whole day, saving as many lives as possible, and essentially saving the day, or referring to John Crichton, of course. So I think the best way to kind of tackle this episode is to just get into it, like what happens, because there's a lot of character moments, there's a lot of raw plot, which is fun to watch, but not exactly fun to just sort of talk about, like, linearly. So, I mean, we have Rowan Woods directing, Babs Grajowski, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Grajowski, writing it, and he or she is pretty cool. I think this is a well-written episode for sure. So I'm trying to start keeping track of the writers and directors in case we start, picking favorites like we did with several other shows that we've watched recently.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this episode aired April 2nd, 1999 in the US and December 99 in the UK. So where do we start? We got... Oh, yeah. I watched the intro a couple times, like the cold open, because I was like half asleep when I first watched it, and I was like, this seems like a dense episode, and if I don't get it from the beginning, I'm never going to get it. So the way it starts is Dargo, Zahn, and Rygel witness a ship disintegrating. Rygel demands they leave, and for some reason Dargo just kind of agrees with that. And John enters command, and they get a transmission that's like, save us, our ship's going to implode. and there's like a sexy female alien that kind of looks like Dargo on the ship, and she was pretty interesting. I believe we find her name is Matala later in the episode. And John and Dargo go on the ship and rescue her and her male consort from the exploding shuttle, and they're about to get off, and then John touches a weird green electric panel, and then in a really awkward bit of effects, sees like triple, like he sees Dargo be like, oh, you gotta get off the ship, you gotta get off the ship, you gotta get off the ship. And then the cold open is him going like, heard you the first time. And then cut to the theme song, which, I don't know, I'm a little disappointed by still.
The theme song?
Yes.
I think it's already starting to grow on me. I liked it a lot when we first saw it, but that was partly because it didn't have the voiceover. I think the voiceover is what ruins it.
Exactly. And there's almost like a little bit of a cue rhythm to the voiceover. He's like, hi, I'm John Crichton. I was stranded in a thing, and then I got shot into space. And there's like a cool vocal effect on it, but it's not like a theme song. Like the only part where it becomes musical is right after he talks, and then you get the what did we describe it as?
I don't remember.
Oh yeah,
just yodeling.
And that's the whole. And then that's Farscape, and it's like an evocative theme song because it's very like weird spacey and not like classic Star Trek spacey, and I like that about it. We'll talk more about the music though as we go on, because I noticed some interesting things about the music, especially in the second episode.
Yeah, I think the theme song will grow on us. I think it looks cool.
It does for sure.
Yeah, and I really like the opening shot of his face getting bigger as it gets louder. I think that's cool.
Yeah, that is pretty iconic. I feel like I've seen that bit of the theme song before. Basically, a lot of this episode is Dargo being really angry and like petty.
Yeah.
Which was really weird to me because he already seemed like such a cool dude. And early on, it just seems like he's being like very clearly manipulated by this Matala lady into doing stuff and hating Crichton and whatnot.
Yeah.
But we find out that the guests, those two, Matala and her buddy, is it Ilonix, I believe?
Yeah, Ilonix.
And they're like, their race is related to Dargo's race, which are the Luxans.
Yeah, they're genetically similar, I guess. I guess it would be like if chimpanzees were, could talk and communicate with us, and they had their own society.
Right. If we were all more physically advanced, like chimps and us, and then we just had humans and chimps. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I like that. That's already like we're learning about Dargo just through his race.
Yeah.
A cool bit of world building that I've noticed in the pilot and in this episode, when they talk about time, like measurements of time in this show, they don't use like hours. They use a measurement called arns, which I always find interesting. I believe, it says here, an arn was a measurement of time. It was approximately equal to 1 hour on Earth. So it sounds like hour, kind of, arn, and it just means hour. And all it is like a weird spacey way of being like, oh, it's space hours, which I like.
Yeah.
But I think they broke that rule in like the second episode. Like somebody else on the ship was like, oh, there's an hour to take off. And that I read something.
Yeah, I think they did that. Yeah, they did that by accident. So. Yeah, that's cool. And then they use cycle means year.
Right, that's a very classic sci-fi thing.
Right. I want to know where the center of this world is, I guess. Like this, you know how a lot of sci-fi galaxies will have like their core planets kind of thing?
Yeah.
Where the seat of governmental power is. I wonder if Farscape has that.
I feel like it will. That's like, the more I think about it, that's like in everything.
Yeah.
Coruscant, the Citadel in Mass Effect, like everything has that.
Right. Because it's just an extrapolation of, urban society to space.
Exactly. There's a hub.
It's right. It's just how countries work. So it makes sense that it's how galactic societies also function.
Right. And speaking of the way that the show does like weird time stuff, and you were just talking about cycles, like one of the important things about Dargo's relationship to this new crew is that he's been in prison for 8 cycles. And
I think it's 7. Am I wrong?
It says 8 on the wiki.
Okay.
Not that I'm looking at a wiki. I know all of this off the top of my head. That he's been in prison for 8 cycles. So there has been a war on his planet with other planets since he left, which is kind of sad, I guess. And I guess it's that they're at war with this group called the Scorvians, who can shapeshift. Is that right?
Can they?
Or is it that we're jumping ahead? Is it just that this?
Yeah, we'll talk. I want to talk about her in isolation because I have a lot of things to say about Matala.
Yeah, she's got some interesting stuff going on. Aaron's son continues to walk around in what amounts
to... Before we leave the point of Arns and cycles.
Oh yeah.
It's making me remember something, a little thought that I had that I don't want to forget because I'll forget it if we move on. Just thinking about this is what always interests me in sci-fi shows when it comes to language, and like it's particularly interesting in this show because John Crichton was injected with the language bacterium thing
right
in the first episode so that he can understand everybody and everybody can understand him. And so sometimes I see this stuff going on, and I wonder, is he seeing everybody speak English, or is everybody speaking a new language, and we see it as English, and so this show is like an impression of what is going on? You know what I mean?
That is interesting that you asked that question because I was thinking about something like that recently. This show got my brain kind of turning on this whole, like, is there life on other planets? And if there is, when and will we come into contact with them? And this idea that, like, how can we communicate with something that we will never understand? And in this world, yeah, they've developed a thing that lets you understand every other language. But then the question is, like, how does it work? Like, does it turn every other language into an approximation of your basic language? And how does it know what your basic language is? And like, what if there are certain words that are lost in translation? Like, are we ever going to reach a point where there's like an alien that says stuff that John's like, no, this doesn't sound right?
Well, because he's doing that to them whenever he makes a reference to something. Like, imagine if we're assuming that this is like a common language that it's turning into. It's like how people in, I don't know, if you're taking Spanish, people always, in high school, people always find it kind of funny when you are like talking and then you have to use an English word or the English name of something.
Right.
And it kind of like drops out of what you're saying. So that's what it, like, he's going like blah 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 blah, Wile E. Coyote, blah 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 blah, and people are like, what the fuck does Wile E.
What is that collection of sounds you just made?
So that's funnier to me if you think about it more about the logistics of the language thing, but also the small moment that raised this question in my head is in the second episode, but I'll just say it. It's not a big thing. It's that joke in the first bit where John keeps pronouncing the name of the alien race wrong.
Oh, what does he call them?
He calls them like tabloids.
Yeah, he calls them tabloids, and they're called like tablex. Yes.
So that is interesting because he's pronouncing it tabloids because it sounds like tabloids, like the English word.
Right.
Right. So that would imply, this is like thought that they probably didn't put into it, but that would imply that he's probably getting things as English, right?
Right.
But then, I don't know, it's interesting to me because then the way that Aaron's son is like Tavlex, and she has like a physical motion that goes with the sound Lex. So like, if that's how it's pronounced, then that's fine. But if we're getting like, you know, an impression or an interpretation or a translation of this show, and then her going like Lex, it wouldn't necessarily be what she was doing. You know what I mean?
Right. And since this is an audio show, nobody knows what you're doing, but you're like enunciating physically the word Lex, or like the sound of Lex. And so
right.
Really, and I know you don't like it when I suggest this, but it's one of those, like, you have to go with it because the show...
No, I'm not. Yeah. I'm not saying that it's like taking me out.
Right.
It's just I like to think about that.
Right. Because, you know, they are clearly physically pronouncing words in English. And so the best argument is for sort of understanding how the language in the show works is that the entire show is taking place from Crichton's perspective. But then what happens when Crichton's not in the room? Like, it doesn't... I
would say that if I had to hypothesize anything, this bacteria gives people some common language. And we, the viewer, are seeing the show in English because that's the best way to understand it. I mean, it's the same deal with Star Wars. Like, we're seeing it in English even though it's in galactic basic.
Right.
It's not English, but that's how we're understanding it. But yeah, it's not taking me out. It's just very interesting because I think the point of science fiction a lot of the times is to defamiliarize yourself from pretty basic concepts and to force you to think about like, oh, what does this actually mean? And so this language bacteria is just making me think about like what are some of the most basic language related things that we take for granted that would have to be figured out, when coming in contact with other races.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge that sci-fi television has because there has to be a language that the viewer can understand. But really, if you were trying to make like ultra realistic sci-fi, then yeah, you would have everyone speaking gibberish, and then if there was a translator, they would have to explain like, oh, this guy is mouthing his natural language, but we're reading it in English. Like it's easier to buy it in that case. I feel like.
Yeah.
That was a cool thing that you just pointed out, and that took us on a good tangent. So, where was I?
Anyway, we were recapping the plot. I think you were talking about the Elonics and the Luxons and the Scorvians.
Oh my. Right. So Aaron's son walks around in her like what is essentially like cloth wrapped around her body, and then like just like a bra, just like a sports bra, essentially. And I was like,
yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I was like, oh, this is like really frustrating. Like, all I ever hear about the show is like, oh, it's so progressive. It was like so ahead of its time in terms of like gender and sexuality. I'm like, sure, but your main like super badass female character walks around half naked all the time. And you made a point when I texted you about that I thought was really interesting, which is that it functions for two reasons. Like, it does in some way function for some form of titillation, right? But also, more importantly, like it has a function within the world because, as we talked about last week, the whatever the fuck they're called. I want to call them the peacekeepers.
Sebaceans.
Sebaceans. Thank you, sir. Are cold-blooded, so they need to always be really cold. They have to keep their temperature low.
They have to keep it
balanced.
Balanced.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense. But also, if we're talking about like
that's like the after the fact justification.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about cool character outfits, like this show, sorry, you were gonna make a point though.
Well, I was gonna make a point about Aaron's son. I don't like. Yeah, her midriff is showing, and yeah, that's an attempt at titillation. But it's not unbalanced. Like John Crichton's always wearing super tight leather pants and super tight shirts, all the time. Like he's got it going on. Man-wise.
There you go. See, I feel like we sound like we're disagreeing, but I 100% am with you.
And then also, like, they never especially sexualize her not having anything on her midriff. Like, whenever I saw it, it always seemed practical and made sense to me.
Exactly.
Like, I don't think Aaron's son is the kind of character who cares if you're seeing her midriff.
That's a good point, actually.
Like it's almost daring on her part because it's like here's a very clear physical spot of vulnerability. Like just try to do anything, and I will destroy you.
And she really will.
Yeah. So yeah, like we can write it off as they're just trying to sex her up and show us her belly button. It's very hot. I love it. But I think it works, and there was never a moment. Like it wasn't like the first time I saw her, I was like, oh, they're showing her midriff now. I was like, oh man, Aaron's son is really cool and hot. Oh, and her midriff is showing. So, it's my take.
You were talking about outfits earlier and how John Crichton is also weirdly like ripped and like constantly wearing like fairly tight clothes. And
yeah,
I am a firm believer in my character-based dramas, like all of my main characters having very iconic outfits, and I'm having trouble like nailing what John Crichton's like look is right now, because the thing is he has like 10 different outfits. Like he's always in something weird, but they're always a variation on like white and gray, weirdly tight, and then they usually just have a really big gaudy IASA logo because they couldn't call it NASA.
Right.
And so, and like Dargo absolutely again, we're talking about the second episode, we shouldn't be, but Dargo like usually has his like classic red outfit, and then at the end of the second episode, when they're like taking him back to like the sick bay, and they're like, oh, everything's better now, he's like wearing all black, and you're like, oh god, like it's weird to see him in something else.
Yeah.
And I mean, clothing in general we can get into in the second episode, because that plays a big role, like what people look like and how they wear their clothes. But to return to this episode, essentially just what happens is that Crichton, it keeps having weird fantasies that Matala is like trying to do the sex with him, and but doing it in like these really weird, like dark ways, where she's like, oh, open this up, I'll show you something, and she like goes towards his pee area, and then he's like, oh no,
just say Johnson.
Just say that area.
Just say Wing Wang.
There you go. Good job. But those flashbacks are fun. Like, they're really dark and weird. And you were telling me that like the show gets crazy dark later because you are a bad person and you spoiled yourself on some things.
Yeah, just like a thing.
Right. And I think there's a production note somewhere that's like, yeah, the creators, like, this was their first attempt to go dark. And it's not that dark. It's just like it's like really uncomfortable. Yes, because like we were talking about titillation earlier. Like, those scenes could very easily just be like very almost pornographic, where it's like, oh, the cool alien chick wants to have sex with our main character, but it always feels a little rapey. Like, because he always gets out of those fantasies like shooken and just like sweating and needing to go somewhere. But to move on, like, to try and follow this plot linearly is a fool's errand. Like, you kind of just have to watch it to have it make sense linearly. But basically, he has these visions where he's jumping back and forth to different points in conversations, and all of these conversations and like encounters with people and with other people getting killed, like, brutally. Mm-hmm. So I think Dargo gets stabbed in the chest. He gets stabbed in the chest. Matala like gets a knife to Aaron Sun's throat in one of his visions. Like, he just keeps getting these crazy visions where people are just dying, and all he wants to do is make them not happen. But he's like, yo, Dargo, shit's not cool right now, buddy. And then Dargo's like, shut up, she's my favorite. And then in one of the realities, there's like a thing where she talks to Dargo privately, and she's like, come back to the planet, we can help, you can, help out the war effort. And then I think that reality ends with her killing him also. Like, most of them just are her trying to kill people, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. But you wanted to talk about Matala?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm typing
Saucy,
something.
You son of a gun.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to talk about the performance a little bit.
What did you think about it?
I don't know.
Exactly.
Like, I don't know what the actress was going for here, because there's, like, the way that she's reading a lot of those lines is like, oh, Dargo,
come with me.
I want to fuck you, Dargo.
She's very wispy.
Yeah. And, like, I guess what's good about it is she's evil.
Yes.
Right away, because you're like, oh, this chick seems evil. But I don't know if she was like sexy or if she was supposed to be sexy. Because then the guy that was with her didn't really talk like that, right? He
was actually surprisingly like mundane for a weird alien guy. He's just like, hey, what's up? Shit's really bad. She's crazy.
Yeah. Apparently, I read in the trivia that his costume, like, the tentacles would flop around a lot, and so he had to stay perfectly still every time he read a line so that his tentacles wouldn't go crazy.
Oh, right.
So he had to, like, remain sitting or standing but not moving, which explains some of the mundanity of his performance, I think.
He's a weird character too. I found him weirdly interesting because he doesn't get a lot to do.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of there to be like, yeah, she's weird. I don't know. Like, so was he like on her side? Was that the idea?
Well, I don't know. Like, I don't really know what to make of that guy, because I thought they were on a team. I thought she whispered to him like they're catching on or something.
Yeah.
Although I guess that was about the weapon, which.
Oh, true.
So let's explain the thing of it, I guess. I guess we can come back to Matala and to what's his fucking face. Virel.
Yes.
By the way, should I stop swearing?
It's fine.
Okay.
I mean, I don't care. If you want to sound more cool, then do it.
I think it makes me sound cool, like I smoke cigarettes.
And you hang out behind the dumpster in the high school parking lot.
Yeah.
Selling kids fake wrestling cards. Anyways.
Did you get sold fake wrestling cards?
No! What? Go ahead. Hi, hello.
Okay. Why? You know all of wrestling is fake, right?
I'm sorry? No, my like audio cut out there. That was I don't know. Hey, what's up? Oh, right, Farscape. Cool. Sorry, I like had one of those moments where I heard what you were saying, and then I blinked, and it was like I jumped forward in time.
Oh.
I'm so proud of myself. God damn it! I'm like, go ahead.
Dodge that bullet.
What was I
going ahead with? Oh, I mean, so do we want to like cover more of the plot first? I guess.
Well, okay, so it just
because we just said that John was seeing these sexy flashes, right?
Yes.
And so he thinks that I'm not cutting you off, right?
You're good.
I'm doing what you were gonna do.
Yep. No, you're good.
Okay. So he thinks that these are just like daydreams, like sexy daydreams.
Right, so does Dargo apparently. He's like, I've been having these weird dreams. He's like, you're perverted is what you are.
Yeah. And so he's like, I'm not doing it on purpose, so maybe it's like she has a pheromone or something, which this is probably my favorite thing about Farscape, is that there's a character who knows as much as we do.
Right.
Like sometimes in science fiction shows, and I read an AV Club review of I think the first episode that made this point. Sometimes it's the hardest thing to establish is like what characters are supposed to know and what they're not, like what's weird and what isn't. And this is something that the AV Club review of what was the episode? The second one we watched with the bugs. What was it called?
The second episode of this show?
Yeah.
Thrown for a Loss? Oh, no. The second episode of the whole thing that we watched. I don't know. The last week's episode. Yes. Okay.
Now it's bugging me that I can't.
Exodus. It's bugging you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Exodus from Genesis.
There you go.
The point they made about Exodus from Genesis is like the cool thing about John Crichton, because everything is so strange and confusing to him, everything is equally strange and confusing. So the other characters in Exodus from Genesis are used to their world, right? But they're not used to this crazy bug thing that can duplicate people and talk to people through other people. So Dargo and Aaron's son and Zahn are like, what the hell is going on? And John Crichton's like, is this weirder than everything else? Is this what counts as weird?
Right. What is weird in this weird world?
Yeah. So I just love that. Like, I think that's such, on paper that sounds dumb, of like, oh, we're going to do a sci-fi show where it's like someone from Earth goes there. And you're like, no, you're ruining it. Like, I want my sci-fi universes to be kind of self-contained and not really reference Earth. Or if they do, it's like future Earth kind of thing. But it ends up being so cool that because he thinks like a scientist too, like he's asking reasonable questions about things. And he's going through it point by point. He's like, okay, Dargo, does she have like an effect on men? Is there like a pheromone situation that I should be worrying about? And Dargo's like, what are you doing? And John Crichton's like, oh, I'm just trying to collect data. Like, I'm not.
That is a good point. I thought that.
I'm not a bad guy. So I think it's just a super cool setup.
John Crichton, the scientist, over John Crichton, the American male, is like way better. Like those two things. When it's one or the other, I always choose John Crichton, the scientist, because he tries to make sense of things, and what it also does is it hints that there is a lot going on between episodes, which is like one of my weird, subtle favorite things about Star Trek. Is that, when I'm not watching this show, for example, John Crichton is doing research and becoming more buddy-buddy with everyone. Like, we're not watching their entire lives together. So he clearly is, like, developing a cultural cachet of knowledge about this world. I mean, like, is it one of these fucking things? And I think that's a really nice benefit of a show like this. But yeah, basically just to wrap up the plot, if I remember correctly, John Crichton eventually, he talks to Zahn, or Zan, I guess some people call her in the show. And she's like, the best way for you to fix this, and she's so chill about it. I love that he's like, this is a crisis and everyone's dying. She's like, nah, dude, like just fucking fix it. And he's like, okay, I'll try. Which is kind of what happened in the second or first episode, I think.
Yeah.
And she's like, just go back and keep people from meeting and do it. Like just kind of pull the pieces apart until you can make this outcome really good. And they're sitting in, and that's where the episode picked up for me, right there, where he's sitting in the room with her and he breaks the statue, and then he kind of goes on this like really cool adventure where he like talks to someone, splits them up from someone else, something goes bad, takes Dargo out of the room and brings him to everyone else, and someone gets stabbed with the Qualta blade, which is what that blade is called, by the way. Fucking love that sword. He just keeps doing things and fixing it almost, and then in most of the endings, the lady either gets away or her ship implodes and kills her and Dargo, and they're all bad. And then he eventually finally hits an ending where Dargo is safe and the lady leaves on the ship that was coming to pick her up. It was like more bad guys, I guess.
Yeah.
And that ship implodes.
Right. Okay. So now we can talk about the not the plot of the episode, but the character plot that is propelling a lot of Dargo's decisions.
Right.
So first of all, before we move away, just gotta say, really cool way to progress a story and to reveal information by having someone run through the same scenario, but having it turn out different ways based on how much they know about what's going on.
Right.
I just think that's really rad way to do things.
My thing with that is just real quickly, so we just finished Angel a week ago, and which is the
2 weeks.
Buffy the Vampire spinoff, and we loved it.
Yep.
But there's this character Illyria who was introduced in the 5th season of the show, and through some timey-wimey crap is one of those goddess characters who can exist in every dimension at once, or she can for up to a certain point. And there's an episode basically where she's doing a similar thing to Crichton in this episode, where she's going back and forth and seeing the future.
Well, she can't exist. That episode was her destabilizing. She has time speed up and slow down powers. Well, and she was becoming unstable, and so she was just moving through time.
Well, that kind of segues better into my point than what I was going for, because basically she has cool time powers for a while, and she also gets destabilized in time for an episode. And that is an idea that the show Angel had to build up for a long time before it was normal, it made sense. Because that is a weird episode. That is a heavy emotional episode, and that character is riddled with backstory. And so that's a show that's based in some form of our reality that has to really stretch to do a plot like that and for it to make sense. It took them 5 seasons, and it had to take them the weirdest season of all, which was season 5, for them to be able to pull off an episode like that. And they do, but I feel had they done that in an early season of Buffy or an early season of Angel, then it wouldn't have worked. What I love about Farscape is that we're getting something like that in episode 3 to us. The show doesn't have to set up and make sense of this character's jumping back and forth through time. It just is a thing that happens because this is the future and everything's weird.
Right, because it all comes back to the way that we are perceiving this world through John Crichton, where everything is fucking confusing, so anything could be plausible.
Right.
Really.
I just really like that.
Yeah.
Back to your point about the thing, though.
Yeah, so let's get into Dargo's stuff, I guess. So these are all facts that we learn over the course of a couple time jumps. I'm not going to try to take them apart and put them in the correct order,
right?
But we'll just talk about them. So what we learn first, pretty early on, is that Dargo. We already know Dargo is a Luxan.
Yes,
that's his race. And you and I have already talked about the fact that supposedly Varel and Matala are Alonics, which is a genetic relative of the Luxans.
Correct.
And so they have some kind of pact between their peoples of we have this genetic tie, so we should work together to make sure that you're cool and we're cool and everybody's cool. what's his face? So Dargo makes sure that everybody on Moya is treating them well because they're his blood kin, basically. And he hasn't seen anybody from his race in a long time. So it's really important to him that he makes a good impression, I guess, and that he can reclaim this connection to his heritage.
Right.
Which I think is going to end up being a big part of his character. I think more than the other characters, his racial or special background is incredibly important to him.
Because it's what defines him. His entire character is his past.
Right. He's a Luxan warrior, and so he needs, a Luxan society to fight for, I guess. So he learns by talking to Varel and Matala that back his home sector, I guess they're like planets near each other or something, or they live on the same planet. I don't know how it works. But the Luxans and the Elonics have entered into a war with some race called the Scorvians, who I guess are just a race that live nearby. And there had been some bad blood in the past, but no fighting. But now there's fighting has broken out a couple cycles ago. And he's like, well, that's shitty. I'm sorry about that. And the scientist guy is like, yeah, but don't worry about it. Like, what we're doing is we got this great, real cool weapon that we're going to bring home to fucking mess up those Scorvians. And Dargo's like, cool, great. And the guy's like, yeah, but the thing about it is it's probably going to mess your ship up a little bit. So, like, don't tell anybody. And Dargo's like, I won't tell anybody because I want my race to be the coolest and the best race.
Okay.
And I want to save all those lives. So that's why there was all that stuff about how Zan was seeing some kind of imbalance in the ship's systems or something. You remember that?
Oh yeah, and she asks Matala, and Matala's like, "It's just your ship's weird. Don't worry about it." Like she kind of brushes it off.
Yeah, and then Pilot's like, "No, it's weird, guys. Like something's wrong."
I love Pilot. God damn it.
Yeah, he's great. So Dargo at this point is sort of on their side, and this happens, within the first or second flash probably, and part of that is Matala uses like her sex touch on him. You remember that scene where they're in the hallway and she kind of sex touches him?
Yeah, like touches. And she also does it to John, doesn't she? Or she tries to.
No, I think that's like that doesn't end up happening.
Oh right. Yeah, she has like a physical. That's her power, basically.
Yeah, I guess.
I like the sex touch. That's a good description.
Yeah. And during that conversation, she's like, "Hey, not only can you help us protect this weapon, but you can come home and fight in the war that's happening." And Dargo's like, "Really? But I committed a bad crime." And she's like, "Don't worry about it. Like you can come and fight for your people." And so that's what is motivating him, is the idea that he can go home, and he can be, a proper member of his society again.
Because that's really all he wants.
Right, that's all he wants. And we get hints that and this is the pivotal piece of information for the episode. We get hints that what he said was his crime in the first episode was a lie.
Right.
Because in the first episode he said that he killed a superior officer in the army, right?
Yes.
Isn't that what he's... but we don't actually know at this point what it was, what his real crime was. All we know is that it wasn't treason.
Yes.
Because they were like, was it treason? And he's like, no, it wasn't. And they're like, good. That's all we wanted to know.
That scene is basically the other guy's only, like Varel. That's like his only purpose is that scene, which is, like you said, very important.
Yeah. Well, his purpose is to be the guy who makes this weapon and is representing a sincere effort to bring the weapon back to this war. Yeah. I am a little confused by Matala's plan. So I'll explain that now, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, Dargo learns about this stuff. He learns that he could go back to fight in this war in his home sector. John Crichton learns about this stuff by overhearing everything. And so he's like, huh? Sorry. There's a lot of plot going on. It's a very dense episode to talk about, but it doesn't feel that dense once it's picked up speed.
Yeah.
So John uses this information in his third time through to convince Dargo, like, hey, they're trying to mess with you, and she's a Scorvian, really.
Yes. She got, like, weird plastic surgery, actually, is the way they described it, to make her look...
Oh, is that what it was?
Right, that's why I earlier was like, is she a shapeshifter? And then I said, no, I'll explain in a second. I think there's a point in the wiki, and like a line in the episode that I missed that was like, she got, like, something physical about her changed through a procedure.
To look like an Alanic.
Correct.
Gotcha. Because at the end, towards the end, when the Scorvian ship shows up... God, I'm sorry, I'm yawning. When the Scorvian ship shows up, Dargo's like, yeah, if they refuse to show themselves, it means they're Scorvians, because Scorvians don't look like Alanics.
Right.
So I was kind of like, well, how does she look like one then? But I guess that explains it.
Right. That's the only logical.
So anyway, John Crichton uses his info knowledge to get them to figure stuff out, and then he goes and confronts the scientist, Varel, or he does that in an earlier, I don't remember. He confronts him at some point about this thing that is happening to him. He's like, I'm going through time and it's crazy. And the guy's like, oh yeah, you got irradiated by this crazy thing. And John Crichton's like, what is it? And he's like, nah, it's too crazy. I don't want to tell you. And John Crichton's like, come on, what is it?
And he just,
I'm a scientist.
He shatters his whole worldview with his answer.
And the guy's like, oh, all right. It's a tiny piece of a black hole. And John Crichton's like, what?
How does that even...
Like, yeah, it's a subatomic piece of a black hole.
And you can just believe that. You're like, well, all right.
It'll fuck you up, man. You're screwed. You're going to be in time, and then you're going to die or something. And John Crichton's like, oh, man. And so then we learn, because of that, at the end of that particular trek through time, that their ship, Varel and Matala's ship, is like unstable because of this weapon.
Right.
And it's like about to implode.
Yes.
And so John Crichton implodes once, and then he snaps back, and he's like, well, that sucked. Imploding.
Imploding is not fun.
Yeah. And so that's the sort of way that they win at the end of the episode, is he knows it's going to implode, and so he's like, just let her go to her ship, and then let's get out of here. And then they all implode, and that's the end.
And so is he no longer stuck in time because the ship is gone?
I don't know, because the ship did implode in one of his trips through time.
That's where I'm worried. I'm like, is he going to have this power again?
I don't think so. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
I think that the ship imploding at the end is basically just supposed to close the loop and be like, nope, we can't. This is like way too complex of a plot point to make a thing, so we're just going to end it by getting rid of the ship that gave it to him. Which, I guess, if you really think about it, is like a paradox. So it's like, oh, if the ship was never there, then he never got the power, and that makes it all make sense, I guess.
It's just, they kind of just end it.
Yeah.
Which, I guess that's fine. I don't know. Whatever.
And then, yeah, so that's basically the episode, and then it ends with... We were talking last week about how we really enjoy the sort of pre-credits, like, last scene of the episode where everyone's like, well, that was crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know how I felt about this one.
Which one? Oh, it was the...
Yep.
Okay, so to sum it up, John goes into the cafeteria area, I guess, and he's like, time to eat my food cubes. Hey, Rygel, what's up? And Rygel's like, I've been eating the whole episode. And John's like, ha, that's funny. I love you, Rygel. And Rygel's like, I don't love you. And they eat their food cubes. And then, the act, like on Ben Browder's part, the acting is really weird in this scene. Because they just went through like a pretty monumental, complex thing. And Dargo kind of walks in and he's like, hey, Dargo, what's up? And Dargo's like, I'm just trying to eat my food. And then he's like, huh, yeah, I'll bet. By the way, you have a dark, dark secret, don't you? And Dargo's like, yes.
I do.
Yes, I do have a dark secret. The way he puts it is Dargo is like, I'm so sorry for what happened. Like, usually I don't let my work interfere with my personal life or something. And then John's like, do you count your dark, dark secret as part of your personal life? And Dargo's like, yes, I do.
Yeah, totally.
I very much do. Stop it, John. And then John Crichton's like, well, I get it. And then Dargo's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I was just so horny. And John's like, whew, yeah. Yeah, I feel you.
That last line is basically
it.
That last line is basically, it's kind of a beautiful, like, the universality of being like a guy, and just like the universality of their, like, that's like a thing that they have completely in common, is that even though one of them's a weird alien with a dark past, the other one's a white dude, they're both just like, women, right? Yeah. Cut to credits. So like thinking about that, it's like, oh, that's cute, but it's so weird in the moment where it's like, oh, everything sucks. Ladies be crazy, right? He's like, yeah, dude, oh, I get it. And then they high five and get beers and sit on the porch.
Yeah.
Or that last part didn't necessarily happen, but it might as well.
Yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot.
It was cute
because it humanizes Dargo.
Yes.
More is the thing. Because it'd be so easy to make his... I think we've talked about this, but it'd be so easy to make his character just like a brute. Just like all about beating stuff up and like, I'm strong, you're weak, I'm Dargo, blah, blah, blah. But he... this is another thing that I'm going to keep citing AV Club reviews, but this is another thing that the AV Club review reminded me of, is that in the first episode, Zan... do we want to make a decision on how we pronounce her name?
Yes.
Is it Zan or Zan?
What do you prefer?
Zan. I like saying Zan, but I think people were saying Zan.
Yeah, Aaron's son was definitely saying Zan. I'm gonna call her Zan for now.
Okay. Zan in the first episode, when Zan and Dargo were comparing information and then they said their ages, Dargo was like young for his race, apparently.
Right. I think he's supposed to be like relatively blue and like not ignorant, but like in that sort of whatever his race's equivalent of his late 20s is, where he's like, figuring things out.
Yeah.
But like trying to figure out his purpose, which I think is also really interesting about.
So it's easy to see him and in a human context be like, oh, that's like a crazy strong adult alien who like knows stuff. But he's like a kid. He's like a horny kid.
Exactly. So
that makes the ending cooler to me.
I agree 100%. Do you know his thing?
What do you mean?
His secret?
I know a secret of his.
Oh, okay. Because I don't, and I really want to know what it is, but I like don't want to know now.
I don't know his crime, but I know
other things.
Something else.
Yeah, for the listeners at home, Magellan spoils the whole show and every show now and forever for Unfair.
Well, not on purpose. I don't Google like, plot points in Farscape. I Google other things.
You Google like, when are Aaron's son and John Crichton gonna bang out, and then you get the biggest spoilers of all time.
Not in so many words.
You said touch tips is how you worded it to me. When are they gonna touch tips? So
it's because of the second episode. Well, because of both these episodes combined, right?
Dude,
because
nice
John's
segue,
like,
by the way.
Yeah, I get it. I'm super super horny, and then next episode he's like just laying down the flirt game with Aaron's son, like throwing her against walls every time there's a noise.
He's always like in her boobs. He's always like, oh, it's so good. Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. So I'm like, wow, if you're going to keep doing this to me, Farscape, how long am I going to have to wait until the inevitable moment where the two people that look like hot humans are like, hey, let's have sex with each other?
And apparently it's
so that's why I searched it.
I'm determined. I'm determined to not let this show. I'm not going to look up anything. Not even AV Club reviews. Are they spoiler free, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah, they are.
Good to know. Also, we are getting some delightful lag right now. It's really fun.
How laggy is it?
It's like 2 seconds.
Wow, that was long.
Yeah, dude. You want
to hang up the call? You want to hang up the call and try it again?
Oh, sweet. And then we can make it a part 2 and make it the second episode part 2.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'll call you back.
Okay.
Hey, we're calling John, guys. See if this fixes it. Hey, he's back.
Hey, what's up?
Hi. No more video?
How's the lag?
That's a good idea. No, it's good.
We can do video, but it's only for our own benefit.
No, I'm saying it's good that we're not doing video because it might reduce the lag.
Yeah, it's possible. Anyway, what were we talking about?
The second episode of Farscape, because you segued into it.
Oh, I was gonna... Yeah, so I did it very well, but now I'm gonna throw a wrench in it for a second and talk about how hard it is to spoil myself in certain respects. Because the Buffy... watched Buffy before.
The Buffy, yes. That's how my parents.
And No, I was gonna say the Buffy wiki. The Buffy wiki would always say like, this monumentous event happens, and then in parentheses it would like cite the episode where it happens, right?
Right.
But in Farscape, the Farscape wiki, it's like, this thing happens on the planet Cloth, blah 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 blah, and I'm like, what does that mean? It doesn't tell me when in the show.
You have to go through more steps to break it for you.
Yeah, so I guess that's not something that I have the right to complain about, but there it is.
I think, yeah, this wiki is not as good as the Buffy wiki or the Lost wiki. If you ever end up watching Lost, and you're gonna need that wiki at some point because there's a lot of dense stuff. But even that one is like, when does this happen? And then they'll have a quotation and cite the episode and cite the timestamp. Like, oh man, there are some wikis out there where it's just like, if you want to know anything, you can find it in like a millisecond, and it's weird.
Yeah.
And that really throws me for a loss. You have fun here on ScapeChatz. We have fun. John, the second episode we watched this week, what was it called?
It's called Thrown for a Loss.
But here's the thing.
Let me tell you, it's much less substantive than Back and Back and Back to the Future.
Which is good because I'm exhausted and I want to get this one done.
Yeah, right.
It's spelled Throne like Throne.
Oh shoot.
Yeah, dude, it's pretty wild. It's pretty much the craziest. No, it's not. Shut up. Yeah, this is the second episode we watched this week. Like way less happens.
Yeah.
I thought this episode was fine. I was really happy to see the gang leave the ship.
Yep.
And since this episode technically comes before the other one we just watched, like in chronologically, it makes more sense that like, oh, it didn't take them 4 episodes to get to the ship. It took them, fewer, whatever.
Yeah.
So we get there's like 2 parts to the A plot, and then there's a very distinctive B plot to this episode.
Yeah.
Basically, let me just run through it. The A plot is that a bunch of bandits come onto the ship, and they steal Rygel and put him in a bag. And you're like, oh no! And they capture him with this really dumb gauntlet, which is only ever referred to as the gauntlet. And well, they all have gauntlets basically, and the idea is that these gauntlets are like the center of this episode. And they make the user like super powerful and able to shoot really dumb CG beams of energy at people, but then they become crazy when they have them on for too long. So it's, power corrupts definitely to everyone. And so they take Rygel, and their idea is to use him as a bargaining chip because they think that he is an extremely valuable member of his race's hierarchy, and that he like has direct ties to the royal line. And so Crichton, Dargo, and Aaron's son go down to the planet to rescue him. And they have a very classic Firefly-esque bit of passing around the gauntlet and progressing through this weird planet with cool blue trees until they find Rygel. I guess I might as well just go through the whole episode and then we can talk about things. They find Rygel, and they do this really cool thing where it seems like they're going to get into a big gunfight, and they kind of do briefly, but then there's like a guy with Rygel in a bag, and John Crichton's like, can I have him back? He's like useless. And the guy's like, no, you're lying to me. And he's like, no, like he's actually, he's been shunned from his society. Like he has no ties to anything. And that's why even the guy that was like in prison with him isn't going to buy him back from you, because everyone knows that he's useless. And Rygel gets some cute moments where he's like, I am useless. I mean, wait. Which I found pretty funny. And then, lo and behold, John Crichton once again uses words to save the day, which I liked.
Right, yeah.
And Aaron's son and Dargo. We got some cool physiological stuff about Dargo in this episode. And we got some Aaron's son being way too into her pulse rifle. Like, I think the best romance on this show so far is probably Aaron's son and her pulse rifle. Because
or Dargo and his blade.
Oh, dude, this entire episode is about weaponry. It's like the most testosterone-filled episode ever. So that is the A plot, and then the B plot, which I kind of preferred, is this weird like personal story where Zan takes one of the people who had the gauntlet onto the ship, and
he was on the ship. He got knocked out.
Right, he got knocked out, and then he's like, screw you, and she's like, no, like, I'm here to help you, you're gonna start having withdrawals from not having your weird gauntlet anymore. And so she's trying to like basically put him through brief rehab and teaches him about kind of everything: sexuality, physical healing, how to identify yourself as a person and not be identified by your weaponry. And then that ending gets kind of sad because he basically, after the shit hits the fan and everyone's being exchanged back, she talks to him and the episode ends and she's on like a video call with him and she's like, oh, like, how have you been? And he's like, yeah, I'm good now that I got this gauntlet. She's like, oh, I thought we got you off of that. He's like, nope, but it was my choice to use it, so I'm happy. She's like, well, and she just kind of, closes the video screen and goes, well, all right, no more sermons. So it's kind of a sad ending, I guess.
I dug it.
I did too. I thought that ending was great. What did you think of this episode?
I liked it fine, I guess. There was a lot of character stuff that really shone here, and the plot itself was kind of just whatever. It really exaggerated my desire to know where this show is going, and like what is the engine of, its monster of the week thing. Because it's not that I want the show to be that, but in shows like this, you kind of have to start where every episode is slightly self-contained in order to build up character facts episode to episode that can then culminate in larger arcs. And so I don't know that I don't know what this show's thing is.
That is very similar to what I thought, but I kind of approached it differently because, I don't know, the second episode of the entire show that we watched was the bug one, and that one was really interesting because it was very clearly a sci-fi as metaphor sort of story.
Yeah.
And I don't know, this episode didn't feel like it had a point to me.
Yeah.
Like, I dug for one, and I think the B plot totally does. It's this idea of, like, what defines you? Is it the weapon that you wear, or is it the person that wears the weapon? And then the A plot is just, we're going to rescue our friend, but oh, hey, it turns out our friend is an asshole, and he's not as cool as he says he is. Like, I feel like this could have been a really interesting episode for Rygel, who is somebody I want to like more than I do, but I just feel like he very quickly established himself in this episode as, like, I'm kind of useless. Like, I don't have any royal backing behind me. I can't physically defend myself, and I'm kind of just mean to everyone. Like, he just, like, he's in prison, and he's in that weird, like, dirt. He eats, like, food from, or, like, he almost eats food from the skull of his, like, fellow brothers or something. And the guy next to him, who is, like, part of another race, is like, hey, do you want to, like, join races together? And he's like, nah, dude, I'm useless. Screw off. And, like, he's so acerbic in a way that I find unlikable in a cast that is surprisingly likable so far.
Yeah.
And so when they rescued him, I was like, yeah, I guess they have to, but, like, what keeps them with Rygel right now? Like, why do they even have him on the ship if he's not doing anything?
Right. I mean, so they kind of dodged that question pretty deftly by giving him a MacGuffin.
Oh, yeah, the stupid red jewel.
Yeah, that they need. So they can explain away, like, oh, they went for Rygel because he has this jewel that they need to stay in orbit, and he swallowed it, and he needs to shit it out. Which, if you want to talk about endings to episodes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, boy.
But I think that is something. I agree. Like, I wanted to. The thing is, in those Rygel scenes, I felt really bad for him. They bummed me out because I was like, oh, I kind of get this. Like, he used to be a big deal. He used to be a fucking king, and now he's in this cell, and there's nobody who will come for him. And you get to see some of the reality of the situation that he's been in, because he's been in prison for like 100 and something cycles, like a long, long time, to the point that he's probably forgotten what it's like to be king. And so he's a jerk because he was a captive for so long, and now he is supposedly free, but he still feels like he's trapped on Moya, right?
Right.
Like he's not liberated in any way. It's just that his captors are different.
Probably
and they're
nicer.
Right, and they're a lot more difficult to be angry at because they're not keeping him there on purpose. And they don't even necessarily want him there to begin with. So he's gone from being this like prisoner of war who can claim a past that makes him feel better in captivity, even if he's stuck, to being somebody who isn't wanted even by captors anymore. So it's like really poignant and sad to me. But like you said, he's kind of a douche, and he doesn't really learn anything from the experience. Um, but maybe he does. I think it was a little soon to give Rygel his own episode because I think he needs to be a jerk for a while because that's his role in the ensemble. But I do hope that eventually we like him and he does something good. That's what I want.
Yeah, and yeah, more than anything, I just want him to have a purpose because this episode brings to light a really interesting layer to his comedy so far, which is that he's very much like his joke is always like, "You guys should treat me with respect. I'm awesome. I'm Rygel, son of blank blank blank." And the beginning of this episode is totally that, where he's like, guys, be cool. Let's pretend to these weird bandits that I'm like your king, and you guys all have to call me like Your Holiness Rygel. And then once you realize that, like, yeah, he's never like he hasn't had a title for so long, like he's basically just like putting on a hat and like playing Prince. His entire comedic element is very sad.
It's really depressing. Because they can go along and be like, "Oh, Rygel, you so and so, you want us to call you king," but it's because he just really wants to be king.
And he was, and he actually, it's weird. Like you're right, I agree that this is like way too soon for his episode because there's a moment where he like explains his whole backstory in like 2 seconds, where he's like, yeah, like I was, king, and then I think like a brother or like a family member was like, no, you did something bad.
I think it was his cousin.
Yeah, his cousin takes over and he's like, you're out of here, and he just kind of he just gets booted off basically, and it's sort of like out of his hands. And it's weird. Like I want to like him, and I think part of the reason also that I haven't been able to empathize with him yet is that he is a puppet, and I think he's well puppeted. I was gonna say well animated, but there's something about like the way his mouth moves where I don't feel like he's emoting very often. I feel like he's kind of just being a puppet mouth. But there are interesting things about like his physiology that I always want to learn more about. Like him and Dargo are like my two favorite. Like I want to know what makes you physically tick, and I can briefly just segue into my little sound design thing I wanted to talk about. But like this episode especially, because it features so many weapons, has a lot of sound effects, and there are little things like there's a moment in the cold open, I think, where I think it's Dargo pulls on Rygel's ears, and it makes this like breaking sound that's weirdly like gratuitous. You're like, oh god, like really that had to be entirely Foleyed because he's pulling on felt or something, or he's pulling on like nothingness. So someone deliberately was like, no, his ears are hard, and that's interesting. And there's a moment where he's like floating on a chair, or like when he's in that bag at the end of the episode, like what is he physically? And I think they're like ways of getting around he's a puppet, but we need you to believe that he is physically existing in this space, are the most interesting thing about him. And I think that's like stuff I want to know more about. And then the music thing that I really briefly wanted to talk about was like...
Yeah, I just had some stuff to say about him being a puppet before we...
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Go away from that. I think that's the other thing that makes this episode difficult, is that the only development that can be made by Rygel at this early stage is for you to see that he understands and accepts that he's playing the part of a king and that he's no longer a king, right? Like that's the development, is him accepting the truth of his situation and accepting the fact that he's not great, he's not Rygel, and being content with it. And that's an incredibly nuanced thing for a character to have to express, and it's like almost impossible for a puppet to convey that, I think. Like puppets need to make big changes for you to get what's going on. He can look surprised, he can look angry, he can look all the like core big facial emotions, but when a story's lesson relies on him making this sort of big revelation about himself in quiet moments, it kind of falls apart.
And it's the fatal flaw of his character, because his whole thing is this like existential unsatisfaction. And again, he can smile, he can eat food, he can do all this stuff. He can't express the thing that is him. And it's one of those things that can't get better over time. Like maybe it can, but you can get a new puppet and you can get new puppeteers, but like you can't improve the CG on Rygel, which is sort of one of the like cons, I guess, of using physical space and using something physical to make a character as opposed to something more malleable like computer animation. And I think if you like we talked about last week, when he's computer animated, he looks like garbage. So they made the better choice now. But when they want to make him do interesting things, they really have. It's like the whole challenge of the episode is to work around him.
I mean, the way to make it work is to have him not think, but to do. Because if he does something that is emblematic of he's become a better person, that's very easy for us to understand. And he, that's as simple as like his puppet hand presses a puppet button that does something good. And we're like, yay, Rygel, you're a puppet, but you're the best.
Right. It's to give meaning to his simple actions and not to make his actions complicated.
Right.
It's weird. Like, dude, Yoda's a puppet. Do you know that? Or he was, and then he was CG. And when he was a puppet, we have all these ideas of what he would do. Like, he trained Luke Skywalker, and he was able to do all these cool flips and like be super badass. He was a puppet, and they were able to do so much with that concept. So I think we are going to get more out of Rygel soon. I just don't think this is the episode that did it.
Yeah, I agree.
My brief tangent about audio was basically just that. We were talking about how like the music is becoming one of my favorite. This was off podcast, but how the audio and like the music is becoming one of my favorite things about the show, because it's not only like really good, really weird drum and bass sort of Star Trek. It's like Star Trek filtered through the late 90s. So a lot of the music, I think the way I described it was like it comes from a world where Crystal Method was like the king of weird, and so it's this very like do 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 do, and like every fight scene is punchy as hell because of that, even though they don't always look super well shot or whatever. And it accents the like atmosphere of the ship really well and of that planet. But what I was noticing when I was like listening to the notes of the music is like whenever something gets really weird, they'll play like a really common tune, but they will change like the key. So whenever like this show is like when there's the scene where the pulse rifle breaks, and when Aaron's son drops it and takes the gauntlet and starts fighting dudes, like the music gets a little weirder, and that's a pretty common thing in musical production for TV shows. But I think it's cool. It's really cool with this style of music, and not because it's not at all orchestral. So they're having to do very deliberate shifts with each individual note to be like, oh, this is a significant, or this is really dark or weird. I thought that was really cool, and I'm keeping an ear out for that now. Yeah,
I think the music is really distinct.
Yes.
The show definitely has a strong, just overall,
aesthetic.
Very strong. It's very strong aesthetic. Like the set design's great. Obviously, the puppets are cool. The costumes and the alien makeup are really interesting. Sometimes it looks fake. Like sometimes if you look at Dargo too close, it just looks like a guy who's wearing a plastic thing on his chin.
Yeah.
But it's a cool plastic thing. The music.
I just got our episode title, by the way. Cool plastic thing. Thank you.
But yeah, and the thing that I appreciated the most in terms of production design in this episode, and I don't really know how they did it, but however they did it was ingenious, which is the plants, the way the plants looked on the planet.
Right.
With the blue, like that electric blue leaf thing. That's not a naturally occurring thing. So the only way that I can imagine they did that is they did some sort of like post-processing with like colors. But it didn't make anything else in the scene look colored wrong, I guess.
Right. It didn't look like a recolored black and white film. It looked like something that always was this color. And I think that continues the trend of like the puppets in this episode. Like this show is very handcrafted. And so even the like background art and the background forest is, we went to a weird forest in probably Australia or Canada, and then we post-process painted over it to make it look weird. And that works. Like it doesn't look fake or awkward at all.
Yeah. I think it's just, this show is making me think a lot about the original trilogies of Star Wars.
Right.
And this sort of lasting, the staying power of practical effects, I guess. Like this show looks really cool and really good. And the only parts of it that look stupid, like you said, are the computer generated parts. And it's just a lot of inventive stuff going into realizing the visual identity of this show, which I really appreciate.
It's a nice show to look at.
Yeah.
What did I want to mention? I don't want to go on a lot about the whole like the weapons of this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, Aaron Sun and her pulse rifle, I joked earlier, is like the best romance on the show. The idea that it shoots and then explodes in like a nuclear explosion was cool, but and then that she gets mad about and like hates John for like a little while because he fucking blew up her gun is interesting. I didn't like the gauntlet. I thought it was a weird like prop. I didn't think it looked real. I think the idea of it like being like a rage maker is kind of interesting, but it never like backfired. Like every single time they someone would get really angry with it and go crazy, they would be able to put them down, because the whole rule is like if they go unconscious, you can take the glove off. So even with Dargo, where they're like, and I like this, they're following a rule. Like you always say, you like how these shows follow rules. Yeah. They're like, Dargo's huge and we can't knock him out, and then Zan is like, I have a sleep grenade. Yeah. This episode is so obsessed with like equipment, to a really weird degree. And speaking of Dargo and anger and stuff, we learn about his blade this week.
Yeah.
And how, although it is a cool sword, it is also able to convert into a gun. And I don't know if you caught this. They don't have to show it converting, because they just cut away and he's like, it's also, and then they cut away to like John and Aaron looking at it, and then they cut back and he's like, a sick beam laser. And they're like, whoa. And that's a really good bit of editing humor that I liked.
Yeah.
But again, it's just like, oh, that's like when I was texting you, I was like, of course his sword is a fucking gun. Like, of course it is. Everything's a weapon in this episode. And there's so little like potential for us to talk about in that. It's like, oh, that weapon's cool, or it had, like, we're talking about prop design. Like, yeah, the gun is cool, but it looks like a cosplay, like, plastic gun to me sometimes.
Yeah.
And so did the pulse rifle, and so did the gauntlet. Like, I don't know if it's the materials that they're using or the fidelity of the show that like make all the props look artificial. Because I love weird gloves and armor in shows like this, and I don't know, I wasn't impressed by like any of it in this episode.
Well, yeah, and I want to talk about the gauntlet a little bit.
Yeah.
I wasn't as bothered by how it looked. I think my problems with it fell under the umbrella of, I think those alien guys kind of looked fake. Like the face of the dude that Zan comforts is like clearly just like a plastic face. It's like a mask and not really his thing. And then their armor just kind of looked like if somebody made like Boba Fett armor out of like paint cans that they found in the backyard. And I know we're like weirdly turning a 180 from like, this show looks amazing and I love the attention to detail, and then like, but these things look really stupid.
Well, I think, the reason we criticize things like this is because there are other things that are so brilliant. So it's like, you forget sometimes that the prop department and the costume department are different. And it's episodes like this where you're like, oh yeah, like maybe their weapons aren't great, but like the way other things look is great. And that's why
the design of the weapons is cool.
Right. They just don't like physically look.
I don't know. It's hit or miss, but in a way that, it's that charm of practical effects where you, on one hand, you get like, oh, they probably made this out of plastic and it looks stupid and whatever. But on the other hand, you're like, but hey, they made this out of plastic. Like, they made a cool looking gun by just making it, Yeah. And so to me, like, even if something looks dumb, it looks dumb in a way that I can appreciate, because it still looks way cooler than anything that I could even begin to understand how they made it.
It's like the thing with cosplay where you're like, this thing doesn't look like what you're trying to simulate. But the fact that one person worked on it and made it out of like cardboard and plastic is like, oh shit, this is interesting that you made a laser sword out of toilet paper and dental floss. It's like you can MacGyver things, and I think that is what makes the like weapons in this show cool. It's like, yeah, these are things that they made and that exist somewhere. Especially in a modern world where so much of our sci-fi is incredibly CG heavy.
Yeah.
But speaking of like weird effects, like what did you think of Jotheb?
Who was the bug alien
You mean
thing?
you mean Cthulhu? You mean just actually
Yeah.
Cthulhu?
I wanna circle back around to the gauntlet eventually. I did have more to say than just that, but I do want to talk about while we're on the because mine is a story point and not a like a prop point. So I like that we're covering all the physical effects in a row here.
Right.
I thought it was smart that he was in the dark.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
And that he was only in that place and never had to move.
Yeah, thought he had a cool voice.
It's all the voice. He does two things. He has 2 points of like movement, and they're in his tentacles, and that's basically his whole character. And also that race never comes back, so it's like, all right, he looked dumb, and we're never gonna see him again. That's whatever.
Yeah.
The side races on the show can look stupid and be gone forever. The Trow, I guess, is what they were called. You wanted to talk more about the gauntlet, though?
Just from so you were talking about how I like it when there are rules in a show.
Sure.
So the falling unconscious rule, I think, makes sense, and it creates a fun sequence at the beginning where they're like, "How do we knock Dargo unconscious?" And I really appreciated the moment where they throw the sleep grenade at him, and they're like, "Ha! All right, we did it." And then the stimulants make sure that he stays awake because that just makes sense, I guess.
And then they have to shake the ship to bump his head to knock him over.
Yeah, and that's like a fun. I love Aaron's reaction to like that was your plan. Like that's so stupid. That's a dumb plan, John Crichton.
It is.
But it's like such a John Crichton plan. It's very charming.
He mostly just wants to show off to her, where she's like, "I can throw this ball." And he's like, "No, I'm better. Check this out." And he doesn't even hit him. He like drops it at his feet. And I'm like, "That was."
Well, he's not supposed to hit him. It's a gas. Like
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It's a good shot. And then she's like, "Oh, nice, very nice."
Because he's like, "Oh, sweet, a water balloon." Dope.
It's essentially, yes, it's a baseball water balloon poison. Or sleep gas, rather.
Yeah. Anyway, so that part of the gauntlet is cool. That you have to be unconscious for it to come off, and it makes sense. The thing that they didn't do as crisply as they needed to for this episode to work is define what the gauntlet does to you psychologically when you're wearing it.
They tried to for like 1 second.
Well, because part of the problem, and again, I'm cribbing off of an AV Club review that articulated something that I had in my head. Part of the problem is that it's very early in the show, right?
Yeah.
And so we don't know the characters well enough to know when they're acting out of character.
That's what I'm saying. The moment where I was like, they tried to explain it was when John puts it on and he's like, I don't feel it. Wait, now I feel it. But he didn't do anything differently. He just goes, now I'm excited. And you're like, you've been excited before, dude. Like, you're not like, he's not like, I can feel the power. He's like, I'm kind of perky. I could shoot some dudes right now. It doesn't do anything.
And he like conducts that final transaction with a fairly level head, partly because the stimulant runs out, I guess. But I don't know. It doesn't seem to affect him and make him as crazy as it supposedly makes Dargo and Aaron. I don't know. Because at the beginning, I was really I was kind of confused because Dargo was like, "You guys suck. I'm taking over the ship," and I didn't know if that was like out of character for Dargo because it kind of made sense that he would be like, "I'm in charge now.
I'm a leadership type, and none of you are taking a leadership role. I'm in."
Yeah, especially since Rygel just left. Because the way I read it is like Rygel is the guy who pretends to be the leader. So because of that, everybody else can pretend to be equals and they can cooperate and work together on some level.
Yeah.
So that works. But when Rygel's gone, there's a power vacuum that was always there and they were sharing. But now it's like got a face to it. And so somebody can be like, I'm in charge. So it makes sense that Dargo would jump to that role and say, you guys suck. I got this cool gauntlet now. I'm in charge. But it was unclear how much of that was coming from the gauntlet and how much was coming from just Dargo. And John Crichton, he kind of addresses this later when Aaron and Dargo have both used the gauntlet, and John's like, if that was your real selves, like you guys got some splaining to do.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, Farscape, that seems like kind of a cop out. Because then. Yeah, that didn't seem different enough from Dargo to really get what kind of effect this gauntlet has. And then it also didn't, for Eren, like, she was just like, I'm gonna kill all of them, and I'm like, yeah, okay. She seems like somebody who would want to kill all of them. Like, that seems like Eren's son.
I think it just heightens what you already feel. Is what it is. It's not like making you evil or angry. It just makes you bold.
Yeah, but I like that's almost too subtle of a thing.
I agree. This episode. That's why I said at the beginning there's not a lot to talk about the weapons. Is they just are what they are. You're just like, fucking, what does this mean? Why? What is this anger defined as? Is it bloodlust? Is it pure?
Them not having a strong, like, identifiable, consistent reaction to the gauntlet.
Right.
It weakens Zan's plot, I feel like, because
yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, her whole thing could have been it's like an interesting sort of take on, like, drug addiction and relying on something that is more powerful than you, and like relying on a group, because all of that guy's alien buddies have gauntlets, so he's like, oh, I want a gauntlet so I can be like everyone else and be powerful and cool. She's like, you can be your own person, but then, yeah, at one point when Crichton's like, oh, if you guys are like this and this thing is just heightening who you really are, then you're like, how does that, like, it feels like it's two different gauntlet stories is what it is.
Yeah, right. And also they don't show any desire to use it again, which seems weird. Like, you'd think if you want it to be an addiction story, the idea is that the A plot should be going through this thing of, like, this gauntlet is powerful and it makes you act certain ways that you don't want to act, but you need the power to accomplish certain goals. And so that's the story of this plot. And it's very present and it's very visceral. And then the B plot is meant to say, okay, so while somewhere else people are enacting the physical realities of this gauntlet, we're going to talk about the psychological implications, or the medical implications of relying on this thing, and what it could do to you if you use it for too long. And so they're meant to, like, work with each other in this sort of symbiotic way where the guy can be like, no, I need the gauntlet, like, it makes me so powerful. Smash cut to Eren's son, oh, I'm so powerful with this gauntlet.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like that.
It feels like two different episodes.
Yeah. So I kind of had a problem with that. And then the other thing is that the A plot should end, if we want this to be a story about the gauntlet, which I don't even know if the episode wants it to be that. It's also the thing. Like, it kind of wants it to be a story about Rygel.
Right.
And it just comes back to your point of, like, what is the takeaway of this episode? I guess part of it is, like, if you really want to zoom out and generalize it, it's like how people relate to power, and what does power do, and what is it like when you had power and you don't have it anymore.
Ooh, you did it.
Like, that's how Rygel and the kid connect. But then, Crichton and Dargo and Eren are just kind of having, like, a beat 'em up sci-fi story.
They're just like, I want the gun, and it's like kids playing with, like, a toy gun, where they're like, I want to use it now. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm done using it. Your turn.
And so if you want the A plot to tie into all that, the way it should end is with John Crichton, like, going in with the gauntlet and realizing, like, oh, this gauntlet's bad news. I shouldn't use this gauntlet. I should win this fight with my words, which seems to be a consistent, like, a cool underlying lesson of this show, which is like, hey, sci-fi conflicts are really just other versions of real world conflicts. And so you shouldn't assume that we're going to solve them with laser beams. You should assume that we can solve them with the same kind of level-headedness and peaceful thinking that we want real world conflicts to be solved with. Like, that's a cool thing that Farscape is doing, that it did in Exodus from Genesis, and that it kind of did here, except it only did that because he ran out of gauntlet juice, and he's like, well, time for plan B.
I think you can, again, zoom out and do that about the whole show and say that it's maybe the show in some ways about communication, and sort of holding a mirror up to society, as a lot of good sci-fi does, and be like, you're put into a weird situation like John Crichton's, and you could so very easily, like, you're put on this weird ship with weird people. You could so easily make enemies and learn to hate everyone. But he gets the translator, and his first thing is to talk to Dargo and be like, hey, we should, like, be a family. and like and we should like make an effort to be good to each other. And also, yeah, so far every one of his like final solutions has been like, what if we just talk to people? Like, what if we just talk to the bug ladies or the bandits, and we were like, hey, let's put our guns down and just be adults for a minute. And that concept paints him and Zan as like the core of this show almost, because her whole thing is to like be patient and listen, and his whole thing is to like not solve problems with violence. And I think that is a thing that I'm going to keep an eye out for. That's like, oh, this could totally be like what this show is about, at least so far.
Yeah.
And like how people relate in weird situations to people.
You could even say that is part of what solved the conflict of Back to the Future, is that John Crichton was able to solve the problem because he learned something about Dargo, and they had a conversation about it.
And they related.
Hey, I know your deal. I know that you have a secret. And I'm trying to talk to you and get you to trust that I have your best interests at heart, and so we need to come to some common ground. So I think that's very true about this show.
I love it.
Yeah.
Is there anything else major you wanted to talk about in this episode?
I wanted to talk about Aaron Sun and John Crichton. They're
gonna bang like 20 times.
Yeah, I really enjoyed their interactions in this episode.
How so?
I don't know, it was just fun. Like, they just had a good sort of friction chemistry.
It's very classic. It's very like, she doesn't trust him, and the way that she grows to trust him is not, and I like this about the show, is not like he impresses her with his power or his like, because that's a very male power fantasy sort of thing. It's like, oh, she learned to love him because he like bested her in battle and like showed her that he's smarter than her. But that he's like, willing to listen and willing to like respect her autonomy. But
also willing to argue with her as well, because we get a very interesting moment where she's like, it's my turn to have a plan, and he's like, that's not like, yeah, that's how joke plans work, but like, this plan is fucking crazy and we need to come to some peaceful solution and not just charge in. And she's like, yeah, right, it's my turn, and she knocks him the hell out, and then he wakes up in the ship. And he has this great line where he's like, okay, hey, you don't get to just knock me out to have your way. That's not how this works. Like, next time you try to knock me out, you better make sure that I don't wake up from it, because that's not how you get your way with me.
Right, he's teaching her in a way.
Right, where he's like, you can't just knock people out. Like, fucking kill me next time if that's how you're going to try to solve problems.
Right.
Which I think is really, really cool. And so it elevates that, like you said, very classic, oh, we're bickering and we each have our own plans, and it's kind of cute that we're like, oh, your plan's so dumb, and but we're going to make it work and we're going to do this plan. And it gives us this extra dimension of like, but really they should be trying to come to some sort of constructive understanding of one another, and they should be coming up with the best plan and not just have this sort of like, Legolas and what's his face? Who's the dwarf? Gimli relationship of like teasing each other on the battlefield kind of thing.
It's a very complex relationship that I like a lot, and one of my favorite moments of the whole episode is and we have to wrap up soon just for behind the scenes reasons, when they're in the forest and they're all passing around the gauntlet. Dargo takes a bullet wound, and we learn that his race has this really cool thing where like when blood is coming out of them and like it's not coming out clean, it comes out as very dark red, I guess is how Crichton describes it. And once it comes out clean, it is clear, and that means that they can heal. Like, they don't not necessarily have like a regenerative factor, but that they can, patch up their wounds based on like a physical aspect of their biology. And what's cool is that scene sets itself up like, oh, Aaron Sun's gonna be the medic because she's the girl, and she's gonna be like, I'll help you and I'll patch you up and make you better. And then John Crichton's like, all right, you can, like, this seems weird. And then she's like, here's how we fix it. We fucking punch him in the back over and over again until all the blood comes out. Like, she completely breaks her archetype right there. And she's like, no, this is the way we do it. And she takes control and he's like, nah, just keep punching me. And it's this almost like masochistic, like, oh yes, please destroy my back until I can be healed. And I love that about Dargo and Aaron. And then Crichton's reaction where he's like, this is working. All right, I'm just gonna, like, he does the Farscape thing where he's like, well, this is working. I guess I'll just let it happen.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed Dargo and Aaron's interaction there as well. And their sort of conversation when he was gone of like, Dude, John Crichton's really fucking weird. Like, he's a weird guy.
Oh yeah.
And
And they're like, what if there's a whole planet of people like him? Like, that's fucked.
That's so dumb. But they still have this tension of like their species hate each other, which is a really cool underlying tension between the two of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Motherfucking Farscape, dude.
Good show.
I'm not seeing any interesting background trivia for this, other than like a lot of the sets and makeup and like costuming were hard to do. Spoilers. Like, Jotheb was hard to do. A lot of John Crichton's like comic references were like not in the script. Mm-hmm. So, and also we're gonna get an episode. I don't want to talk about it in explicit terms, but I just have to. There's a season 3 episode that is entirely animated.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
That's gonna be this show's version of the Angel Puppet episode.
Right. I was gonna tell you about that, but I didn't want to spoil it.
Yeah. I mean, I just know that it exists, and that's in season 3, so that's fine. Crichton mistakes. Oh yeah, he like mentioned John Wayne. He's like, oh yeah, he was in True Grit. He was Genghis Khan. He was Kung Fu in the movie Kung Fu, and you're like, wait, what are you saying? Nothing else really good. Scene between San. Oh yeah, Zan got like hella naked. That was cool, I guess.
Yeah, I was not paying attention at that point, so I don't remember why she did that. Just to like shock the dude, or what?
Well, I liked that scene because it's a really cool like gender and sexuality and like power imbalance kind of commentary, where he's like, she's like asking him to change his clothes, and he's like, why? Because you want to see me naked? And she's like, I don't really care. And he's like, you probably don't. You think like, genitals are weird, right? Hey, what about this? And then he like flashes her, and she's like, that's interesting. And he's like, aren't you freaked out? And she's like, not really. And then she just like pulls off her robe, and she's like, I am absurdly attractive physically. And then he's like just mouth agape, and he's like, well, guess her race isn't really affected by sexuality or.
That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. She's just like incredibly confident that she can just pull her robe off and then put it back on and turn around and be like, yeah, by the way, get changed. We have shit to do. Like, she just, I loved that.
That's awesome. You want to preview the next 2 episodes?
I do. Those are the episodes that we watched this week. Next week we're watching episodes 5 and 6 on Netflix, which are PK Tech Girl and Thank God It's Friday again. Before you read the summaries, I want to say, on the lists of like, hey, here are the episodes of Farscape you should skip, and here are the ones you should watch, PK Tech Girl is the first one after the pilot that's considered a must-watch. So
interesting.
That should be interesting for sure. Yes.
Cool.
What is it about though?
Well, let me tell you. PK Tech Girl, episode 5 on Netflix. I want to say I don't remember where it is in the real order. If you could look that up.
Ah, okay.
To save Moya from attack by a race of scavengers, Crichton and a female peacekeeper Tech, left behind by Captain Kryce, join forces.
I miss Kryce.
I don't think we see him in this episode. Or maybe we do, I don't remember.
It's episode 7 in real time, by the way, if you're playing along at home.
Cool, gotcha. And then, Thank God It's Friday again. Dargo and Zahn are influenced by the Tanit plant, a root that obscures all individual thought and rules the lives of each worker.
Oh, here we go. We're getting into the juicy stuff.
Interesting. So that's another very classic sci-fi plot.
The evil plant?
Well, the evil thing that, like, turns everybody into Borg.
Oh, right. I'm excited.
I mean, even Buffy had that one episode where they were all digging that pit.
Oh, that was a bad eggs, I think it was called.
Something like that. I don't remember.
Good stuff. No, bad stuff. I don't know. This is I'm really happy that we're still at the point where I'm like excited immediately to watch the next episodes.
Yeah.
Because we reached a point in both Buffy and Angel where I was like, and currently we're also watching Twin Peaks, just more background information for people.
Yeah.
All 3 of those shows have had points where I'm like, yeah, I guess. Like, I end up watching them the night before we talk because I'm like, fucking...
Yeah.
We have to. But that is ScapeChatz episode 2 in the bag.
ScapeChatz.
That's... What did I say?
ScapeChatz.
All right, we got some editing to do. That was ScapeChatz episode 2. And my name is Alan, and I am with my co-host...
Magellan.
Hey, it's Magellan!
Hey, what's up?
And next week we're going to talk about more Farscape, and we're going to have fun sci-fi adventures about being lovely with your friends and going on a space adventure.
Mm-hmm.
So Won't you come with us?